The evening began with an air of excitement and anticipation. The wife, meticulous in her planning, had spent the entire day preparing the house for the party, fluffing cushions, arranging hors d'oeuvres on polished platters, and ensuring the lighting struck the perfect balance between warm and inviting. To her, this wasn't just a social gathering. It was an opportunity to create a space where her husband could unwind with friends, colleagues, and acquaintances, a chance for them both to show their warmth and hospitality. The guest list wasn't overly formal. It was composed mainly of close friends, a few of her husband's co-workers, and some neighbors they had grown fond of over the years. She never imagined that anyone of great significance, especially her husband's boss, would have any interest in such an intimate gathering. After all, in her husband's stories, the boss always seemed like a figure far removed from casual affairs, powerful, demanding, and far too busy for something as simple as a house party. As guests began arriving, the house quickly filled with the comforting hum of conversation and laughter. Glasses clinked as people toasted to small victories, and music floated in the background, soft enough to allow easy conversation but upbeat enough to create energy. The wife moved gracefully between groups, her natural charm making everyone feel welcome. She checked in on the appetizers, refilled drinks, and smoothed over the occasional awkward lull in conversation. Meanwhile, she observed her husband in his element, or so it seemed. He was laughing loudly with two of his colleagues by the kitchen island, recounting some humorous story from the office. Every so often, he would glance her way, and she would return his smile, knowing that these small domestic triumphs, where their home became a hub of warmth, were moments to be cherished. There was nothing extraordinary about the evening at first. The chatter was friendly, the atmosphere relaxed, and the wife felt a deep sense of pride watching her guests enjoy themselves. She thought about how parties often reflect the hosts. If that was true, then this evening reflected her and her husband's partnership, solid, welcoming, and filled with laughter. Yet beneath her ease, there was a faint sense of duty. She knew her husband worked in a competitive environment where impressions mattered, and she liked to imagine their home life gave him strength. Even though this was just a gathering of friends, she felt the responsibility of making sure everything appeared effortless, that no detail slipped through the cracks. By the time the evening reached its stride, the house seemed alive with energy. Some guests gathered around the dining table playing a light-hearted game, while others congregated in the living room debating movies and sipping wine. The wife looked around satisfied. This was what she wanted: connection, laughter, and joy filling the walls of their home. She had no idea, however, that the calm rhythm of the evening was about to change drastically. The night had only just begun, but already an unseen twist lingered at the edges, waiting for its moment to turn this ordinary gathering into something unforgettable. The party was in full swing when the moment that changed everything arrived. The wife was in the middle of handing out fresh drinks to a group of guests in the living room when the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the noise. At first, she thought it must be a late arrival, a neighbor perhaps, or one of her husband's colleagues who had said they might stop by after finishing up work. She placed the tray down, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the front door. When she opened it, the sight that greeted her was the last thing she expected. Standing on the threshold was her husband's boss. Tall, sharply dressed, and carrying the kind of aura that instantly commanded attention, he was the very picture of authority. For a split second, the wife froze, her mind racing. Why would someone like him, a man whose reputation was built on professionalism and power, appear at a casual house party? He hadn't been invited, not formally at least. Her husband had mentioned the event in passing, but they never believed the boss would take it seriously, much less show up. Recovering quickly, she offered a polite smile. "Mr. Reynolds!" "What a surprise. Please come in." Her husband's face across the room paled slightly when he saw who had entered. The chatter and laughter around them faltered for just a moment, a ripple of awareness passing through the guests. Everyone knew who he was. His presence needed no introduction. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Where the evening had once been casual and free-flowing, There was now a heavy undertone of formality. The boss stepped inside, handing his coat to the wife with a gracious smile, though his eyes scanned the room like he was assessing more than just the decor. His demeanor was polite, but there was something deliberate about it, as though his arrival had been carefully chosen to unsettle, to test, or perhaps to reveal. The husband, visibly nervous, hurried forward to greet him. His voice carried a forced brightness. "Sir, what an honor! I wasn't expecting you tonight." The boss waved a hand casually, as if brushing away the tension. "I thought I'd stop by, see the man behind the hard work." "Besides," he said, glancing around the room, "it looked like you were having more fun here than at the office." Guests exchanged curious looks. Some were starstruck, others whispered quietly, wondering why a man of his stature had come at all. The wife, sensing the shift in energy, moved quickly to regain control of the situation. She offered him a drink, guided him into the living room, and tried to fold his presence into the gathering as though it were perfectly natural. But inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that his sudden appearance wasn't random. Her husband's strained smile told her he felt the same. Whatever the boss's reason for showing up, it was clear. The evening had just taken a turn. What began as a simple party was about to become a night no one would forget. At first, the wife tried to convince herself that her husband's boss's arrival was nothing more than an unexpected but harmless surprise. After all, he was smiling, accepting a drink, and engaging politely with guests. But as the evening unfolded, she began to notice something beneath the surface, a tension that threaded through the room, subtle yet undeniable. The boss, Mr. Reynolds, had a way of commanding attention without even trying. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he laughed, it echoed just a little too loud, as though it demanded acknowledgement. Yet it wasn't his dominance that unsettled the wife. It was the way his words carried undertones, the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long when he looked at people, as though he were peeling back layers to see something hidden underneath. She noticed her husband first. Normally animated and comfortable around friends, he now seemed stiff, his laugh tighter, his posture rigid. Every time Mr. Reynolds asked him a question, his answers came out clipped, measured, as though he were navigating a minefield. The wife watched him fidget with his glass, avoiding eye contact whenever possible, and she felt a protective concern rise in her chest. The boss didn't stick to polite small talk. Instead, he asked strangely probing questions. "So how do you all know each other?" he asked a pair of neighbors, his tone casual, but his sharp gaze seemed to weigh their answers. To her husband's colleagues, he told stories from the office, harmless anecdotes at first, but laced with implications that left listeners second-guessing whether they were compliments or criticisms. Even the wife wasn't spared his attention. More than once she caught him watching her, his smile polite but his eyes unreadable. When he complimented her hosting skills, it was with a tone that felt double-edged, as though he were testing her reaction. "You've done a remarkable job tonight," he said, holding her gaze longer than necessary. "Not everyone could make such an atmosphere, comfortable and controlled." The words were kind, but the pause before controlled sent a shiver down her spine. Meanwhile, the other guests sensed the change, too. The laughter that once flowed freely now came in uneven bursts. Conversations grew quieter, more cautious, as though everyone was hyper-aware of the boss's presence. Some guests seemed eager to impress him, while others avoided his orbit altogether. The once easy warmth of the party had shifted into something formal and brittle, like glass that might crack under too much pressure. The wife moved through the room, doing her best to maintain the balance. She smiled, she refilled glasses, she made light-hearted comments to ease the stiffness. But all the while, she couldn't shake the feeling that the boss was here for a reason beyond social courtesy. His presence wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, and as the night stretched on, with every loaded comment and every assessing glance, she realized something deeply unsettling. This wasn't just a casual visit. Mr. Reynolds was here to make an impression, but whether it was a warning, a test, or something else entirely, she couldn't yet tell. As the night drew deeper, the subtle tension that had been simmering beneath the party's surface reached a breaking point. Guests were scattered across the living room and kitchen, conversations growing quieter, glances darting toward Mr. Reynolds, as though everyone was waiting for him to make his next move. The wife, balancing her role as host and protector, tried to keep the atmosphere steady, but even she felt the weight of anticipation pressing down. It happened suddenly, an action so unexpected that the room fell silent. Mr. Reynolds, standing near the center of the living room with a glass in his hand, tapped it lightly with a spoon. The sharp chime cut through the chatter. "If I may," he said, his commanding voice drawing every eye. At first it seemed like he was about to make a toast. The wife prepared herself to smile politely, to nod at whatever carefully chosen words he might deliver. But instead of the usual praise or empty compliments, his words, and what followed, left everyone stunned. "I came here tonight to see something more than just a party," he began, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling directly on her husband. "I wanted to see the man behind the work. And what I've discovered," he paused, taking a deliberate sip of his drink, "is not exactly what I expected." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. The wife felt her heart skip. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as if bracing for a blow. Then, in a move no one saw coming, Mr. Reynolds reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He handed it to her husband with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Consider this an opportunity, or a challenge. Which one depends on you." The room collectively held its breath. The wife glanced at the envelope, noticing her husband's hesitation before he took it with trembling fingers. The boss didn't explain further. He simply raised his glass, toasted to truth in all things, and drank. The gesture left everyone bewildered. Was it a promotion? A warning? A trap? The wife tried to read between the lines of his cryptic words, but his expression revealed nothing. To make matters more shocking, as if his dramatic presentation wasn't enough, he followed it with another act, turning directly to her. "You," he said, his tone softer now, almost intimate. "You've done an extraordinary job tonight. Rarely have I seen someone balance so much with such poise." His compliment hung heavy, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, like he was drawing her into the strange power play he had begun with her husband. Whispers broke out among the guests, the once light-hearted atmosphere now saturated with confusion and speculation. The wife's pulse raced as she realized this was no ordinary visit, no casual appearance at a party. Her husband's boss had orchestrated this moment deliberately, to test, to provoke, and perhaps to reveal something none of them were prepared to face. The party was no longer about laughter and friendship. It had become a stage, and the shocking gesture was only the opening act of whatever Mr. Reynolds truly intended. The moment Mr. Reynolds handed over the envelope, the entire tone of the evening shifted from uncomfortable to unbearable. The once bustling conversations had thinned into uneasy whispers, and the atmosphere felt like the air just before a storm, charged, tense, ready to break. The husband stood frozen, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand as though it weighed far more than paper should. His eyes darted between the boss and his wife, silently pleading for guidance. The wife, though equally bewildered, could sense what he couldn't admit aloud. This gesture wasn't simply professional. It was personal, and whatever was inside that envelope had been designed to make a statement, not just to her husband, but to everyone present. Finally, one of the guests, emboldened by curiosity, muttered, "Are you going to open it?" The question seemed to hang in the air, pressing her husband toward action. With reluctant hands, he tore the flap and slid out a crisp sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the words, his expression tightening with every line. He didn't read it aloud, but his silence spoke volumes. "What is it?" the wife asked softly, stepping closer. Her husband hesitated before answering, but Mr. Reynolds cut in, his voice smooth and unyielding. "It's an offer," he said. "One that requires sacrifice. Success always does." The cryptic remark only heightened the tension. The wife could feel anger bubbling beneath her confusion. What kind of man intrudes on a personal gathering just to publicly corner someone like this? Guests exchanged wary glances, some edging toward the door, sensing the evening had spiraled into dangerous territory. Her husband's hands shook slightly as he folded the paper and shoved it back into the envelope. "This isn't the place for this," he said firmly, though his voice carried a tremor. But the boss only smiled as if he had achieved exactly what he wanted. "On the contrary," he replied, "this is the perfect place. A man's true self is revealed when he's surrounded by those closest to him. Tonight I wanted to see your priorities, your strength, your weaknesses." His eyes flicked briefly toward the wife at the last word, a move that made her chest tighten with unease. That was the breaking point. The wife stepped forward, her voice steady even as her pulse raced. "You've made your point," she said, her eyes locking onto Mr. Reynolds. "But this is our home, our night. If you came here to humiliate him or us, you've overstayed your welcome." The room fell silent. Even the music in the background seemed muted, as if the house itself was listening. Her husband's face was pale but filled with relief at her words. He hadn't been able to push back, but she had done it for both of them. Mr. Reynolds studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he chuckled. "Impressive," he murmured, though no one could tell whether he was mocking or genuinely admiring her courage. The confrontation left the guests rattled. A few began excusing themselves, eager to escape the suffocating tension. The party that had started as a celebration now felt fractured, overshadowed by the boss's calculated intrusion, and though the boss eventually stepped back, sipping his drink as though nothing had happened, the damage was done. The wife and her husband knew that the fallout from this night had only begun. The envelope, the public display, the veiled threats. It wasn't just about business. It was about control, and they had both just been pulled into a dangerous game. By the time the last guest slipped quietly out the door, the house no longer felt like their home. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the casual warmth of the evening, all of it had been swallowed by the shadow Mr. Reynolds had cast. Empty wine glasses sat forgotten on tables, and the remnants of untouched food now seemed like stage props left behind after a performance. The wife leaned against the dining table, her arms folded, staring at the envelope still resting where her husband had placed it. The sight of it made her uneasy, as though it carried a weight heavier than paper could bear. "What was in it?" she asked finally, her voice breaking the silence. Her husband, sitting heavily on the couch, rubbed his temples before answering. "A promotion. But not just that." He hesitated, his tone bitter. It came with strings. He made it clear. "It's not just about what I do at work anymore. It's about loyalty, obedience, even my personal life." The wife's stomach turned. She thought back to the boss's cryptic words, the way he'd looked at her, the deliberate way he had tested them both. It hadn't been about celebration or generosity. It had been about power, about seeing how far he could push before they broke. Her husband's shoulders slumped, and for the first time that night, she saw the toll it had taken on him. "He wanted to embarrass me," he admitted quietly, "to remind me that no matter how hard I work, he's the one in control. And he did it in front of everyone I know." The wife crossed the room and sat beside him, placing a steady hand on his knee. "And yet, you're still here." "We're still here. He wanted to break you, but he didn't succeed." He looked at her, his eyes heavy with doubt. "Didn't he? What if speaking up costs me my job? What if this so-called promotion is just a trap? If I refuse, I could lose everything. If I accept, I might lose myself." Her heart ached at his words, but she refused to let fear dictate their path. "Then we make the choice together. Whatever happens at work, whatever he tries to pull, you're not alone in this. He came into our home tonight thinking he could intimidate us, control us. But what he saw instead is that we're stronger together." Her husband took her hand, gripping it tightly, as though grounding himself in her strength. The silence stretched between them, not heavy this time, but thoughtful, like the calm after a storm. The wife looked around at the empty living room, the faint smell of candles and spilled wine still lingering in the air. She knew their lives would not return to normal after tonight. The envelope, the confrontation, the boss's calculated game, it had exposed more than just workplace politics. It had forced them to see the precarious line between professional ambition and personal integrity. As she leaned against her husband, one thought crystallized in her mind. The party was over. But the real test had just begun. And no matter what Mr. Reynolds planned next, they would face it side by side. Would you like me to also add an optional epilogue style? Reflection beyond part 6, something like a short glimpse of how their lives change weeks later, or keep the story closed where it is.